Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Two World Podcast. We are reaching you, at least I am, from beautiful Ohio in the United States, where we have been blessed this week with unexpectedly sunny weather. It is a joy to be here this morning. It is also an honor to be able to introduce an episode of a program that we have loved and enjoyed. And it is called Northern Exposure. We're going to talk about a first season episode, the second episode of the program, which I believe debuted as a summer replacement. So there were not a lot of episodes in the first season. And we hope to have you enjoy what we talk about. It is also my honor to introduce the two co-hosts of Two World Podcast.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jacob.
And I am Barney. And of course, as Ken said, Ken Nain's here with us today. And we're excited to talk about this episode, this show in general, as from a few episodes ago, we even entered into discussion on what Northern Exposure is. And we realized that there's a lot of potential potential to discuss different episodes and the themes in those episodes and really how they relate to our podcast and the themes in our podcast about hospitality, different cultures, travel and whatnot. And we thought for sure that today's episode has a lot to do with different cultures and people interacting with them and hospitality as well. For me, I was the one who suggested this might be a good episode to think about. And of course, it was very fresh in my mind just from seeing it so many times. And it never gets old to me. But how about you, Jacob? This was your first time to see Northern Exposure at all, wasn't it? What was your initial reaction to seeing the show? You didn't see the pilot, I think. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, right away, I was struck by all of the personalities with their distinct worldviews and different approaches to problems. And I love the quirkiness of the dialogue and of the characters, that they represent a huge cultural diversity from like around the United States and even the local Inuit culture. And I liked that it was philosophical. I felt that it was asking deep life questions, but working through them with very accessible daily struggles like plumbing and radio broadcasts and personality clashes. So it was exciting and interesting. I'm glad that we're launching into doing these podcasts. We've been thinking that maybe every so many episodes we would dedicate one to Northern Exposure. So I'm looking forward to viewing more episodes. And I think this was a great one to start with, because you do get an introduction to so many characters in this one. So.
Yeah, the philosophical thing that you mentioned, of course, we are, I think, Barney, correct me if I'm wrong, we are introduced to Chris in the morning in this episode. Was right the first episode?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, he was. Okay. Mm-hmm. But we do hear him on the air. And but speaking philosophically, I like, this is now near the end of the episode, after many conflicts with Maurice during the episode, which we may do here. But you know, when him and Maurice are reconciling their differences, you know, he looks at Maurice and he says, you know, when I think about your mind, I see something that's deep when I think it's shallow, and shallow when I think it's deep. And, you know, as we become acquainted with the quirkiness of these characters, Maurice is well defined at that moment and is consistent throughout the course of the run.
Yeah, there are so many quotable moments in this episode where there's just pithy wisdom and statements that, oh man, I could draw on that later. And I liked the conversation in the episode about pride, and I'm kind of hoping that we can get into that a little bit today, how our own sense of pride gets in the way sometimes of us making healthy decisions. It gets in the way of us having healthy relationships. It keeps us from reaching out or growing. And so I guess I wondered, I know that it's specifically mentioned in the episode, but did that connect with you, Barney and Ken, the idea of pride as a prominent theme in this episode?
Yeah, one thing that kind of, especially as you see the rest of the series, it kind of, this episode stands out in my mind because Joel is kind of being a good doctor. Usually it kind of feels like he's the one who people need to help. It's kind of, even though he's a doctor, it's kind of rare for him to be kind of the center, that everything is turning around, where he's helping all these other people. And yeah, like he's recognizing the different problems that are affecting people's health and affecting the community, and he's recognizing, pinpointing it, that it's pride. When we kind of get the feel that Joel is all about pride, like he loves being defined as a New Yorker. He really loves and strives kind of feeling a bit of distance, like he doesn't want to be categorized as, I'm not a bumpkin, I don't do the outdoors thing, I'm from New York City. He really has a lot of pride in that. And so it's interesting that he can recognize that in the other characters as being really the key issue as what's holding them back.
Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps a little bit of background for our viewers to get to Dr. Anku and what, in case you just have a passing interest in Northern exposure, the real basic story being that Ed, one of the characters in the town of Cicely, comes to Dr. Joel Fleischman, the New York doctor, and says, I need you to come and see my uncle. And of course, there's the quick humor where, my uncle's a doctor, and Joel says, which doctor? And Ed says, yes. And, on we go from there. So Joel is invited to dinner to see Dr. Anku, who at this point refuses to come and see Joel because of pride and other things. And one other thing I was thinking about while Barney was talking, as a writer of the series, it might have been tempting to portray Dr. Anku as the perfect doctor who is right about everything. But one of the great things about this series is, no, we're not going to follow that path. We're going to make these people human and perhaps have pride and other things that we suffer through.
That's good. Yes. And there's a moment when Joel actually confronts Dr. Anku and specifically says, this is an issue of pride, that you're not treating this cancer, because Dr. Anku, being a medicine man, is concerned about his image. Like, what will his patients think of him going to another doctor? And then we hear Dr. Anku talks with his wife, and he's like, Joel, she agrees with you, and he decides to go away to get treatment elsewhere, not from Joel, but he does agree to go off to the hospital to get treatment. And it's interesting how he's open to grow, and he recognizes that. And I'm kind of wondering if you could talk briefly, either Ken or Barney, to give a little background about the other story about pride that Joel recognizes when he sees Maurice and how he's interacted with the DJ and the whole situation surrounding his desire to kind of get out of the mess that he's inadvertently created, and his response to something the DJ did. So would either one of you be willing to speak to that?
Yeah, I like this part of the story because we really see an interesting part of Maurice. Joel mentions kind of offhand, I think I forget, he and Maurice are kind of having a heated discussion at one point, and Joel mentions, he's like, you threatened me with violence and, shot a gun in my general direction, in the pilot episode, actually, because Joel is trying to get out of this contract. And at this point, we, especially in the pilot episode, we see Maurice really clearly defined as conservative, outdoorsy, like a man's man. I mean, I think he was a colonel or something in the Marines, or, some really high ranking, pilot. And then he was an astronaut, and, he's not afraid of anything. And then here we see that he loves show tunes. Yeah. And we find that out because the DJ of the town, Chris, kind of makes some comments that makes Maurice uncomfortable, and they have an off screen, over the radio fight, and Maurice takes over the DJ duties and is playing just show tunes constantly and telling stories. And he loves what he's doing. He loves hearing himself. He thinks he's the most interesting person on the TV, but the town really disagrees and wants to hear Chris instead, but he can't recognize them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they segue into, okay, we will have a town meeting. Is the mayor at the time, and it becomes an autocratic, this is the way it's going to be, even though every person there is hollering, we want Chris, we want Chris. But to Maurice's credit, we see a slight evolution into, let me see here in his mind, who shall I go and talk to? And he picks Joel Fleischman, the college educated physician, medical school graduate. And Joel, even in the second episode, has the wherewithal to say, Maurice, you're terrible on the radio. And Maurice does not respond either physically or verbally with abuse. And then there's a conversation with Maurice and Chris where things are made all right.
It's interesting how Maurice realizes in that moment he's stuck. He's like, okay, I fired Chris. I'm in this role now. The doctor doesn't think I'm good. The town has already given me their feedback that they don't like it. How do I get out of this and keep my pride intact? And that's that key moment when Dr. Fleischman said, it's an issue of pride. It comes down to this issue of pride. And it's interesting how Maurice goes about navigating his solution in a way that he can kind of keep his sense of self-respect intact. It's very subtle, but he does try to right the situation when he rehires the DJ, because he tries to like plant the seed of the idea in his own mind. He's like, and don't you want to ask me something else? And the guy's like, or don't you want to say something else? And he's like, when they're trying to reconcile, first the DJ apologizes and he's like, isn't there more that, and then he's like, you want your job back, right? And he's like, oh yeah. And that was his out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he says, okay, Chris, John Wayne didn't do his own, writing and fighting. We need our heroes. I understand that. Walt Whitman is a pervert, but he's the best poet that America has ever produced.
I like how we see a little parallel with Maurice and Anku at this point, or a little bit before that, where Uncle Anku, the first time when he invites Joel over, he's hanging on to his pride a little bit. So he's saying, the first rule of medicine is do no harm, and the human body is a self-writing machine. And Joel says, I can't agree with you more. And then Anku is kind of like proving to his family, who really want him to get treated, see, I'm fine. Everything's going to be fine. There's no need to worry. I'm fine. And this New York City doctor agrees with me. And when Maurice and Joel are talking in Joel's office, Joel is actually very tactful, where he says, like, you're too different, you're like locks, or, like this or that. You're really, and then acquired taste. And Maurice is like, he kind of picks up on that. He's like, I see. So you're saying that I'm kind of like really refined, and, like only the really great listeners out there will appreciate me, but maybe not everyone else does, and then he's able to kind of stay reassured in his heart that he's okay. He's he doesn't need to change. It's not really his fault that everyone had such a vocal reaction to the town meeting. But maybe he's too much of an acquired taste is all it is.
That's an interesting point, that his own response varies from Dr. Anku, and they each respond to their being confronted with their own pride differently. And Maurice, at least at this point, navigates it by largely keeping his pride intact, where Dr. Anku has a slightly different posture. But then I'm wondering too about Joel and the words from Dr. Anku, to catch a fish, you have to think like a fish, and how he had kind of turned around the role of receiving, instruction or advice, and then gives it. I guess he gives advice several times to Dr. Fleischman, but at this pivotal moment, it really impacts Joel and his own understanding of how he needs to relate to this other person in the town. And so I'm wondering if either of you would talk about when you saw that scene at the end where I forget the character's name, where he goes to her house to give her medicine for her knee. Maggie. Yeah. Did you feel like that was Joel's version of trying to like move past his own pride by doing that? I kind of would like to hear your take on that.
Yes, I believe you've hit right on it. He also deeply likes Maggie, of course, and he's not yet willing to perhaps acknowledge the fact that this particular person, a woman, sure does know a lot of things, and she is absolutely able in this world to exist up here, and I'm not. What were her words? Hopelessly addicted, hopelessness,
helplessness junkie.
Oh, man, great writing.
Yeah. That's a great point. How we can see, because Maggie came from Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and she came from the lap of luxury.
Yes.
Her father is a CEO at GM, and she wants to be there, and she wants to be a part of the community, even though she was an outsider. And Joel doesn't want to, and yeah, there's always a lot of tension between them, because I think that exactly like Ken just pointed out, and I just realized when he mentioned it, that Joel doesn't want to admit that that maybe Maggie can do things better than he can, because he's a doctor. He went to Columbia. There shouldn't be anything that he can't do, and if there is something that he can't do, then it's just not worth anything. Which again is kind of this prideful thing that we see, this kind of chip on his shoulder that we see a lot.
Wow. That's a good point. Well, you touch on something there, Ken, that also connects with a question that Barney had sent us before we started recording today. And that is about assumptions we have about other people. In this case, Maggie as a woman, so about a gender, assumptions he has about a gender. It could be also like elsewhere we see in the show assumptions about sexuality, like Walt Whitman and his sexuality being a part of the issue, and how sometimes when we're confronted with a story or a book or I'm forgetting exactly how you phrased the question, Barney, and I should probably hand it over to you, but basically the idea being sometimes something changes our viewpoint, an experience or a story or a book or a movie, and then we see a group of people differently or a culture differently or an individual. Do you want to frame that any more, Barney? Or
you got it exactly. Yeah, I was thinking of Chris's story at the very beginning of the show. How he's saying that he and his friend stole a car, and then they broke into a house, and he said while his friend was rifling the upstairs looking for valuables, he went to the kind of the study in the house, and he found this book of poems by Walt Whitman, and he said that really changed his life right there, and his outlook. But his outlook changed even more when he was in jail, I guess, or maybe corrections. And his supervisor or officer said, you shouldn't be reading that because Walt Whitman was, probably he said something like a deviant or something like that. And then it made Chris realize, wow, this person wrote all of these great poetry and it means so much to him. And now he realizes that Walt Whitman also had different sexuality from what's typical. And it made Chris reflect on kind of the way that he treated people who were similar when he was growing up, and he felt badly about doing that.
Yeah, and it seems like the conclusion of the episode unpacks that a little further with, and I know Ken already touched upon it, Maurice's example of John Wayne, how he always had this view of a certain type of masculinity when he thought of John Wayne, the tough character who wasn't afraid to do what needed to be done. And then Maurice later found out that John Wayne didn't do his own stunts. And that made him angry at the person who told him, that made him question his own sense of John Wayne as a hero and his own sense of maybe masculinity and strength. And
when I looked at your question, Barney, it brought me to a place of where there could have been change, but it just didn't happen for me personally. The quick story would be about 3 years ago, Angie and I went to Canton to watch a movie that was out at the time called Queen and Slim. It was a story of two people of color, actually staged in Cleveland, where the female is a lawyer. He is a person seeking his way in the working world. They're pulled over at night. Horrible things happen, and out of self-defense, a policeman is shot and killed. They both, of course, realize at that moment that this will not be a good situation for us, and they go on the run. And the rest of the story traces their path to a very sad ending. Now, there were a couple of distinct moments in the movie. There was a moment where they are visiting, I believe, one of her relatives as kind of a sanctuary. And in the matter of the discourse between this family of people and the guy who is on the run, I found the discourse to be very awkward to me. And there's people laughing in the theater. Now, Angie and I are very much a minority in this theater. This is predominantly an audience of people of color. Okay, so moment number one where I need some help. Moment number two is maybe 20 minutes before the end of the film, a number of people of color got up and left. So the unresolved part for me is not having the chance to have a conversation with the people who left, some of the folks who are finding this particular moment humorous, where I have no concept and understanding of why those things occurred. And I could have easily been then changed by those moments.
To me, having somebody translate what's going on when there is another culture or another topic that I'm trying to understand, if there's somebody with experience that can translate it, I find those conversations so meaningful. For example, Katie worked at the OERDC for a number of years, and I have read a number of books about Islam, some when I was in college, but I never really spoken with a Muslim about their practice of their faith. And so there was at that time when she was working there was a soccer night where we would all play soccer together. And then afterwards we'd hang out and talk a little bit. And I remember I had an in-depth conversation with 4 Muslim co-workers of Katie, and they were just sharing about their faith. And I learned so many things. And then after that night, I ended up walking with one of them just as a follow-up to the conversation. And I think Islam is often painted by our media in a very particular way in light of kind of its connections with radical actors, and abroad sometimes who do acts of terror. We don't always get a nuanced view of the practice of the religion of Islam or how Muslims view it. But when I was walking around the OARDC Arboretum with this person named Hadi. He just was sharing about his faith, and it was during the month of Ramadan, and he was fasting. And I just had this deep abiding sense of his sincerity and his commitment to his family and to people in the community. And
that's amazing that you tell that story. Because I had something very, very similar when I was teaching at the university, and we had kind of our elective classes that we did, and it was up to us that we could teach whatever we wanted. And I did half a semester on religion, and I also invited. So I spent a lot. Also, I learned about Islam in university as well, and then I kind of refreshed myself preparing for the class, and then I asked one of the professors. So first, I asked the students to come, and I asked the professor if he'd be okay doing this, and I said, write down at the end of class, write down any question you have that you would want to ask, and then in our next class, this doctor who's from Bangladesh, he'll come, and he's more than willing to talk, and yeah, just hearing him react to the students and talking with him through email, here's some of the questions. Are you okay? And then just having conversations through the hall. And yeah, I felt really this real connection with him that way too. And with what people from who are Muslim believe and what we believe. And it was just really great. And then I felt really, I felt like I went to say salam to him. And then I thought, is it okay? And so I looked it up, and then people were saying, it's really weird when people who aren't Muslim say salam to me. So it's like, oh, I won't, but, and I said to him, I really feel like we have this connection, really kind of a brotherhood together. And he's like, yeah, I'm really glad that, that you felt that. And I'm so thankful that you invited me into your class, and that the students wanted to learn more too. Mm. And kind of along that way, even on the topic of books, kind of changing how we think about things, is this book that Jacob gave me. Is it backwards?
No, it's perfect.
No, it's good.
Okay, good. Yeah, Surprise the World, and about the 5 habits of highly missional people. And maybe we'll talk about this again on an episode about personalities, but there's one habit of listening. In the Mennonite Church, I don't think that, or at least growing up, I don't really remember too much talking about sensing the Holy Spirit or listening from the Holy Spirit, so actively. Mm-hmm. And when I was little, I was always so amazed about the idea of the Holy Spirit and what the Holy Spirit is about. But I always felt it was something that, like, it's only like mystical people, or like other people, or people from the Bible, could ever get in contact with the Holy Spirit. It wasn't something that ever I could do. And yeah, I mean, it's not really instructions, but the author really talks about, listening and getting in touch with the Holy Spirit. And it really changed a lot about me reading that, and being able to have my own kind of maybe understanding of times in my life previous to that, where I'd been able to kind of have some real personal touch with the Holy Spirit, and then seeing how to make a habit of it. And it was something that I thought really was kind of for other people and was beyond my reach. And then, thanks to Jacob just giving that book to me, thinking that I might like it, more than anything, that I was having questions about that. And then it just really gave me this empowerment to it. And I'm just really, that was just really a book that really changed the way I saw and understood a lot of things.
As Barney was talking there about listening as a practice and being sensitive to the Spirit and the opportunities we have to listen, you shared this past Sunday in church a story about visiting a local community, the Glenridge community, and how you were playing games with someone and they had a different set of rules, and how you had a decision. Like, you could have been a stickler and been like, oh no, this is the way we play the game. But you kind of waited, and you were flexible, and you said, I'm going to play by the rules that this younger person, this youth, likes to play with. And would you want to say a little bit more about that? Like, what, by your posture there, do you feel it opened up the door for more relationship to happen?
Well, I could be curt and say, old dog, new tricks. um, yeah, it's just one of those moments, guys, where this young man is very earnest, not being overbearing like I was tempted to be. He was not overbearing. He was simply saying that's fine, but here's how we play the game of skip bow. And he didn't say, let's try it that way. He said, could we try? He didn't say anything. And so it was up to me at that point to say, no, we're not going to do it that way because I know the rules, or let's give it a shot. And, we gave it a shot. And as I told everyone on Sunday, it wasn't just we got through it. It was a great way to play the game. Somebody put some thought into making this game, which is very slow moving sometimes, move along. And a great moment with kids. Barney, he was maybe 10 years, he's 10 years older. So it was sweet.
That's awesome. Yeah.
One reason why I chose this episode is I'm very curious to hear your answers to this question. It was basically my main question. Again, Uncle Anku is trying to save face because he doesn't want to be seen as not having the answers in his community. He in fact says he would rather die than be seen as not being able to heal people. And I feel not so much now, but when I was teaching the university, I felt, especially teaching medical students who are very, very smart, I felt a lot of pressure to know everything about English. Some of the students were very good. Some of the students came from Southeast Asia and were very, very good at English. And it always made me just a little bit uncomfortable if maybe they're going to ask some really specific grammar question or why is it that you say this? And I might accidentally explain it, with one of those, with one example, and then of course get tripped up a few sentences later with the, English always breaks its own rules example. And so I really felt a lot of pressure teaching the older or the higher levels. If I'm gonna have to, lose face with having a question that I just can't answer or can't answer well. Has similar to Uncle Anku, have you professionally felt those kind of situations in your professional lives?
Definitely one of the most extreme examples, and this is unusual, but when I was defending my dissertation, you've done this project where you've worked, in some cases, multiple years preparing the study and writing it and present. And then you get to this point where you're supposed to have a command of all of the unique content that you've dealt with. And then your committee is sitting there. And in our case, they invited the broader campus community. Anybody who wanted to attend could be there and ask questions. And so you want to have the answers. You want to think on your feet and be capable. And so I think that is a time when I felt especially like, oh, I needed to perform and know as much as possible about these topics. But then I feel like in other settings, it's been freeing to tell people that I don't know the answer. And that sometimes is a more authentic thing to do and leads to more fruitful conversation than trying to come up with something, particularly when we talk about faith or spirituality or religion. Like sometimes in a conversation, we can't all have exhaustive knowledge and be experts of every area, every aspect of faith. It's such a large thing, and God is so huge and surpasses our capacity to fully comprehend. So each of us brings a unique perspective or set of knowledge, and I think in a faith context, it's helpful to actually sometimes say, "Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. What can we discern together as we talk about it as a group?" I know when you're teaching, that's different than when you're having a conversation, maybe in a church context. But I think that is related to that that bigger discussion we had earlier about pride. It can be related to that issue about pride. Some people feel that they're diminished if they say, I don't know. But really, as a matter of fact, sometimes they're more approachable then. People see them as a human being, and maybe that opens the door for somebody actually to be vulnerable around them, since they've been vulnerable enough to say, I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question. So that would be my reaction. Ken, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Jacob, the I don't know. First of all, what flew into my mind was, can you imagine being the president of a country, and you're asked these questions, and you have to feel the pressure of, I got to have something good here. It's just. But anyways, when I was a secondary teacher, math teacher, I can remember so many times sitting in on a not with teachers, doesn't necessarily have to be that, but sitting in discussions. Let's say the gross national product comes up in the conversation. People would look at me and say, well, you're the math teacher. And I must admit, I'm sure there were plenty of times when I went on pontificating about the gross national product of our country, figuring in my mind, well, they don't know about it. And it's embarrassing to admit that, the federal income tax code. Well, you're the math teacher, the upcoming school levy. Well, that one always felt like sort of familiar ground, because I may actually have something truthful and fact-based to say about that. But the pressure was there. And Jacob, it took me a very long time to be able to be a person that would say, I don't really know. What do you know about the gross national product? And then went away from that real quickly. Way back as I was leaving high school to go to college at Miami of Ohio. Okay, let's pick a major. And many relatives and people around me said, well, you're pretty good at math. Accounting is what you should do. I didn't know very much about accounting, other than I knew they use numbers a lot to come to some consensus of a result. So that was my major. Freshman year went okay because it was core and didn't have to get into it. Sophomore year, of course, now it's time to take the first economics, econ courses, first courses in accounting. And econ, I kind of enjoyed. The accounting experience, I had disdain for every single day I was there. It was not a bad instructor. I had no blame to place other than, this is not for me. So I went through counseling at college and had a good experience there and found a new path. And in the end, teaching seemed to be a much better fit for me. The pressure was there, certainly.
It's interesting in your story, not to make this go on too long, but it's interesting in your story how people were expecting you to be the expert about things that you don't have any right to be the expert about, just because of some tiny, tiny connection with that. And I wonder, I'm sure that happens in a lot of ways, in other aspects of all of our lives, where, maybe in my case, the people around me, well, you're American, you should know everything about America, or about this small town that my cousin once went to, something like that.
If there's flooding in southern Japan, how's the flooding?
Oh, surely I know it affects me somehow. Yeah, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I guess I want to connect that back to the idea of putting people on pedestals and having heroes, and we want to have this simplistic view in our mind of a heroic figure or a very capable person who has the answers. But just like what we've been saying, they're much more nuanced in real life than we often tend to think, and we're more comfortable with them in the abstract. And so I guess part of me wants to speak to that in light of our episode today, to say the town loved it when the DJ told Walt Whitman's story in its fullness. They want it. They were more interested in reading his books once they knew a little bit about something about him that was outside of the box, and so
maybe really accessible to kind of everyday people. We have our sports heroes, and I can think, I'm sure I could think of another stories, but I think one case is when they do this great, wonderful thing for the team, and it's just this wonderful reflection for the city, and then we learn about this thing that they did in their personal life, or something that happened during the celebration, or this or that, and it's a real mark on this person. All they are is just good at sports or something like that. And we forget that, because there's so much catharsis going on that we connect with, and identity, and they become such a part of who we are. And then we forget to give them credit for being humans. And, maybe they're not such a wonderful person, maybe their personality needs some adjusting, to begin with. And we forget that, and we put too much expectation on them just because of what they can do, in sports and acting and things like that. People probably who we most readily think of as heroes, in a way. And and I think that sometimes maybe on one hand, we kind of feel bad about having made this kind of person a hero, when if we think about it long and hard enough, there could be so many other people who could be even more inspirational as heroes. And maybe this kind of talks to Jacob's question earlier about, why are we always looking to quantify things, to quickly decide about something, to put it in a place and then see how it relates to us and then move on, instead of maybe even just like Jacob's story from earlier, talking with the scientists at the OERDC, and taking a long stroll with someone to learn about who they are and about what their identity is and how they represent that. It's a lot more work, and I don't know, maybe just humans are just lazy, just busy, or we need to make these decisions, but we really get the fruit from being humans and being in part of a community, by taking time with people. And in a way, that's kind of what Northern Exposure is. It's a long 6 seasons of being with these actors, these characters who are kind of real. They have a lot of faults, and we sit there with them, and we learn about them, and we see when they make mistakes and how they deal with that too. And it's refreshing about this show how we can make these connections with who we are too.
Maybe Dr. Anku would piggyback on your commentary, Barney, and say, perhaps we should just dance. I-E-I-O. The scene of Joel dancing by his truck,
at the very end,
by anyone after he visits Maggie. It's I'm sure, Barney, you've experienced this, having watched all of them. There are times when you feel like applauding. And
thank you both so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it, and for selecting this episode. It was a great starting point, and I'm so excited we're going to be pursuing this further. And we want to thank our viewers and our listeners for coming along with us through this discussion. We hope that you have heard some interesting ideas, or perhaps maybe some questions were framed for you today that will be helpful in your own experience of how we encounter people from other cultures or backgrounds to us, how we understand figures that we look up to, how we work through our own struggles, or in some cases, pride. We're so grateful for you. Thank you for being here. And until next time, goodbye.